Okay, Farah, you're live.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a series of conversations on the most important things that impact. Did something happen?
Continue. Go ahead. Farah, you're muted.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our conversation on making sure that the needs of our most marginalized students become an intrinsic part of our educational system. A very, very warm welcome to Dr. Pedro Noguera for being here tonight. Thank you for never saying no to me. I remember when I was a young teacher and thought the New York City system, educational system needed an education movement that would start with an education summit at a vocational high school named Samuel Gompers High School. I laid my sight on you as someone who would help me speak for my students, and everyone laughed at me. Nah, they said, this education summit cannot happen, and you cannot get Dr. Pedro Noguera to come speak at your school. And my principal only agreed to the summit because I said I could get Dr. Pedro Noguera to come to our summit. And she said, you know what? The great and the wonderful Pedro Noguera would not come to our school and would not be our keynote speaker. Therefore, summit is not happening. And I said, please give me a chance. So I nervously made that first phone call, and to everyone's surprise, the acclaimed and the celebrated Dr. Pedro Noguera agreed to shift his schedule to be our keynote speaker at that very first summit. And I want you to know we are now preparing for another education summit that will be borough-wide in the Bronx and hopefully citywide the year after. And for us at New York City CEFT, this is like the offshoot of this. And there is no one that I would rather kick this off with than Dr. Pedro Noguera, because he gave me my start in community organizing, even though he didn't know it. So more than a decade later, I'm still at it, and he's still saying yes to me. So thank you so very much, Dr. Noguera, for being here this evening. And I want to say an equally warm welcome to Deputy Chancellor Quintana for being here tonight. And I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Letitia Thompson, for the opening remarks for New York City CEFT. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much, Farah, for that warm welcome. We live in a system in which your race, your ethnicity, your class, your gender, your disabilities can decide whether or not you are left behind. Even education that is supposed to be the great liberator and the great equalizer feels like another tool to be used to continue to oppress our most marginalized populations. If you're an indigenous person, a descendant of enslaved Africans, a person of color, including members of the Latinx and Asian American and Pacific Islanders communities, if you are poor, if you have disabilities, whether it be intellectual or physical, if you are all of that, and you are also a girl or a member of the LGBTQ+ community, you are almost guaranteed a subpar education that will lock you out of the American dream and give you your membership card to a permanent American underclass. Recently, we've experimented with supposedly facing the problem head on, calling out racism, classism, sexism, ableism, xenophobia, homophobia at every single turn. This seems to have resulted in more divisions, more alienation, and a certain resistance from many who resent the labels of racist, classist, sexist, ableist, xenophobic, and homophobic because they don't perceive themselves as such. In fact, many consider themselves aliens, allies of marginalized people, but have a different worldview or different ideas on how to arrive at inclusion and equity. At New York City CEFT, we wish to center the conversation on building educational systems and structures that respond to the educational needs of poor BIPOC students without the divisive and often emotional narrative, yet without denying our common history, while at the same time inviting everyone to be a part of the solution and the solutions. We imagine solving the educational problem in a multi-tiered, multifaceted, multi-dimensional endeavor based on need and not the one-size-fits-all model. And in our philosophy, this requires a pragmatic level of self-reliance and self-sufficiency from poor BIPOC communities in order to be able to fill in some of these lackings that government and public education cannot fill. That is why, for example, in District 8, Angela Torres, the president of the District 8 President's Council, is leading the charge to turn every PA or PTA into a 501c3 to help the community raise money, to supplement the budgets of schools to address the needs of our students. So tonight, we want to begin a series of conversations on how to build this new educational system in which meeting the needs of every student and the needs of poor BIPOC students is intrinsic and infusing the role of families and communities to support the schools in that endeavor, and that be inherent. And now I'll pass it on to my colleague, Angela Torres, who will introduce the man who will lead us in this conversation.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Thompson. That was wonderful. And I am so honored to introduce, bienvenidos a todos, okay? I would love to introduce Dr. Pedro Noguera. He is everything that Farah mentioned and more. Dr. Pedro Noguera is Dean of the USC Rossier School of Education and Distinguished Professor of Education. Dr. Noguera is an elected member of the National Academy of Education, the Phi Delta Kappa Honor Society, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. A sociologist, his research focuses on the ways schools are influenced by social and economic conditions, as well as by demographic trends in local, regional, and global contexts. Prior to joining USC, Dr. Noguera was a distinguished professor of education in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies at UCLA, and a professor at New York University, NYU, Harvard University, and the University of California, Berkeley, where he was also elected to the school board and taught in the Oakland Public Schools. Dr. Pedro Noguera appears as a regular commentator on educational issues in the national media. His latest book, A Search for Common Ground, Conversations about the Toughest Questions in K-12 Education, co-authored with conservative commentator Rick Hess, won the Association of American Publishers 2022 Prose Award. He has served on the boards of organizations including the Economic Policy Institute and the National Equity Project. He advises officials in many states on educational policy and was honored by NYU's McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research for his research and advocacy efforts aimed at fighting poverty. In 2022, Dr. Pedro Noguera was ranked third in the nation for influence and impact by Education Week. And for all of these reasons, we are so honored and proud to invite Dr. Pedro Noguera to speak to us today. And we just are listening for the nuggets of wisdom that he has before us. Thank you so much, Dr. Pedro Noguera, for being with us. Bienvenidos.
Thank you, Angela. And thank you, Farah, for inviting me. And thank you all today for bringing me in from Los Angeles. I do wish I could have done this in person, and perhaps that'll be possible in the not too distant future. But fortunately, these kinds of virtual gatherings work. And it's great to be here with you and be part of this gathering today. So you heard my bio, but what my bio, my professional bio doesn't include is that I was born and raised in New York City. I grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And that's a part of Brooklyn that many of us know still hasn't gentrified. And back then, when we lived in Tilden houses on Livonia and Stone, both my parents immigrant, neither of whom graduated from high school or college, we were totally dependent on what the schools had to offer. And as you heard, not only did I get amazing opportunities through my education, but so did all my siblings. All 6 of us went to some of the top colleges in the country. I share that because we started by saying too often, the backgrounds of kids is determining what they can do. My challenge to all of you is to say, we have proof that that does not have to be the case. I'm proof, and I'll bet you there are others on the call today who are living proof that regardless of your background, regardless of where you grew up, regardless of the challenges and barriers you have faced, you can, in fact, use education to improve your life, to help yourself, your family, and your community. It's that dream, it is that possibility that drives us and that brings us all here together today. The question is, how do we ensure that it's not just an exception here or there, but rather large numbers of students whose parents may not be as active as mine were, that are getting that opportunity. My father, who, as I just said, did not graduate from high school, he did eventually get his GED. He used to teach us, you can get a free education with a library card. And he practiced it. And he would make us go to the library on Saturdays. My point in sharing that is, we can do more to support our children if the whole community is involved, if parents are involved, because we cannot expect schools alone to address this problem. Parents have a role, grandparents have a role, our neighborhood organizations have a role to play. New York City has vast resources that you can use to support children and families. You now have a chancellor who knows this because he led a network of schools in all 5 boroughs. He is what I call a 5-borough New Yorker. There's not many of them. Most people, they just know their borough. David Banks knows all 5 because he had Eagle schools in all 5 boroughs. And he served one of those groups, males of color, who are often the most likely not to succeed. So he has some valuable lessons to share with us. And I think understanding what makes success possible, what makes it possible to use schools as a support system for children is what we should be focused on. The truth is, I used to, when I was in New York, and I've been away now for 7 years, I could name schools, because I would visit schools all over the city that were serving kids well in all 5 boroughs, all kinds of kids well. So the proof that you can do this is in New York City. You don't have to go far away. The question before us is, why aren't we doing this in more schools? And what would we need to do differently so that all schools, regardless of where they're located, serve as that pipeline to opportunity, are responsive to the needs of kids, challenge all kids so that they can get the education they need and deserve. So I'm happy to be with you today and delighted to be part of this conversation.
Thank you so much. I couldn't agree with you more. I'm here in South Brooklyn, and I'm very lucky that my son goes to a school here in District 21 that is a community school and serves the needs of all children, from Nest students, everyone. So I think it's a wonderful, wonderful school that I wish everybody had the opportunity to have. So I would like to just start by welcoming you and welcoming Deputy Chancellor Quintana. Also, I think Chancellor Banks is on the panelist now, as well as superintendents, principals, teachers, families. Thank you, all of you, community advocates, for coming. We really appreciate it. We have several topics. Each slide we'd like to spend 15 minutes on. There are 2 topics per slide. So if we could have 7 minutes per topic, and panelists feel free to chime in, being mindful of the time. The first topic is, if Carla can share, the first topic is constructing school and citywide structures and systems. I'm sorry, Carla, we're on the second slide there. Nope, now we're on the third. Sorry, guys. It's constructing school and citywide structures and systems to support students so that the support is systemic and not just the work of individuals. And I'll just give a quick example that Farah taught at a school in the Bronx, where a cafeteria worker would provide meals to students long after school hours. So it should not be that kind of just individualized attention. That was the first topic. And then the second topic is ensuring that principals and teachers are doing all they can to address the needs of poor BIPOC students, as making it an intrinsic part of the way schools operate. So I'd be very curious to hear what your thoughts are on that, as well as, of course, our esteemed panelists.
Is that my question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so ways that we can construct systems that are citywide and school-wide, so it's not just individuals. And also ensuring that teachers and principals are working to make an intrinsic operation addressing needs of poor BIPOC students.
No, thank you for the question. And you're right. It should not take, Herculean efforts by a staff member or a teacher to serve our kids. There will always be dedicated staff out there who go out of their way to help kids, and that's a good thing. But in a lot of our schools, our staff, our teachers have lives too. They've got families, they've got other demands on them and their time. So one of the things I've argued for many years, as soon as New York mayoral control was created, is that mayoral control gives us the opportunity to involve other departments in the city within our schools. Parks and Recreation, the health department, they should all be working together, particularly in some of our most disadvantaged communities. Many people know about and have celebrated the accomplishments of the Harlem Children's Zone. And it is amazing what they've accomplished there in Central Harlem for, I believe it's 12,000 kids. However, it's expensive. And most of the money to support the Harlem Children's Zone comes from the private sector. We have the ability in New York to draw on resources from the public sector and from philanthropy to be targeted in communities of need, to create systems just like the Harlem Children's Zone in the South Bronx, where I was actually involved in an effort just before I left, an effort called South Bronx Rising Together. We need a similar effort in East New York. We need targeted approaches, because you can't just put it on the schools. And the city has the resources, and what it needs is now the coordination to bring those resources to bear to support schools.
Would the Chancellor or Deputy Chancellor like to add on to the topic of how we make it system-wide, systemic, as opposed to individualized? Or
Yep. So I agree with Dr. Noguera in terms of, and this is something our Chancellor has said quite a bit, right, in terms of making sure that it isn't something that is exclusively the responsibility of the school system. And I'm actually at the Council for Great City Schools conference right now, where I've heard some fantastic examples of large city systems, none as large as New York City, obviously, where when the mayor's office, the other social services that we have available, other offices, Parks and Rec, all of those other places that can support and our community and local institutions, and all of our great parent groups in New York City. We have some really, really strong parent associations at the school level and then at district and central levels. And so when we're all working together, I think that brings strength to our system. But the piece that very specifically the work that my teaching and learning team is responsible for is about creating coherence across what we're doing, having a really clear vision for what it is that we want to see in terms of the structures, the practices in each of the schools, communicating that very clearly, and then thinking about in what way we can either already build off of the structures that are there and the strengths that we see, or where we need to do something that is new, but do that in it has to be a graduated plan, and it needs to be iterative, right? We're too big of a system for us to be able to do everything at the same time, or to do it citywide at the same time, right? And so to be able to do those pieces, to learn from them, to generate the data, and then to be able to influence another district at a time. The other pieces, and we've talked about this in other conversations before too, it's incredibly important for teaching and learning not to work alone. And so working alongside Deputy Chancellor Lloyd's team with communications and intergovernment, so that we are making sure that this message is not only making it across the city, that people actually know what it is that we're doing and working on, but that we also have the support of those folks, that we're working with the Division of School Leadership, because making sure that all the superintendents are a really big part of this practice. And in fact, my team met with all of the superintendents, each division. So they met with specialized instruction and special education. They met with the Division of Multilingual Learners. They met with curriculum and instruction and teacher development, because we wanted to make sure that we all had a common message and that they knew what was going to happen, and that we are part of developing their teams, so they in turn can develop school leaders, who in turn can develop the teachers to have the impact on students. And so this sort of shared and graduated approach in that way.
Great.
So if I may chime in just for 1 second, I'm sorry. So
No problem.
Dr. Noguera and Deputy Chancellor Quintana and Chancellor Banks, so you must know that a lot of us here are not in favor of mayoral control. And part of the reason for that is that for the very same reasons you described, Dr. Noguera, right? So the mayor should be able to get all of these systems into the schools for the kind of outcomes that we're looking for. Yet at the same time, you find that our principals complain, not I, just principals that I know, complain that it's so much top down that they don't get to respond to the needs of individual children and families and communities, because everything is coming from a centralized type of system. How do you respond to that? How do we find the balance?
So, I understand the concerns about mayoral control from a accountability standpoint. And my hope is that now the PEP it is an autonomous body that can actually raise tough questions to the DOE to make sure that decisions are being made in a way that reflects the priorities and needs of the community. So that's something we have to watch out for, right? In New York. But I still would go back to what I was just saying. I was, for example, very encouraged when I saw under Mayor de Blasio the universal pre-K get going. However, I watched the rollout, and I knew then it was not being done well in many communities. It was being done in a very haphazard way, just so they could say, we did it. And I tried to tell them then, it's not good enough to get it done. You have to get it done right. All the research shows that preschool only has the impact if it's high quality. I would ask all of you right now, do we have high quality preschool in New York City? From what I hear, the answer is not yes. We have it some places, and in many others, that's not the case. So we have work to do to make sure that these opportunities are provided in a way that will really make a difference. Bringing in city services. I was working with DeWitt Clinton High School in the Bronx several years ago. DeWitt Clinton, at one point, graduated people like James Baldwin, the writer, okay? And many others, judges, generals, you name it, all from that high school. When I visited several years ago, it had more homeless kids, it had more special ed kids, it had more formerly incarcerated youth than any school in the city. And its enrollment had plummeted, and very few services. So it was the kind of school anybody who could would avoid. They would not put their kids in that school. Why not make DeWitt Clinton, bring it back to the way it was? It at one time served over 5,000 students, right? you could do that again, but you don't have to make it so large, but you've got to bring the resources in so that people will want to put their children in a school like DeWitt Clinton. If we could do it back in the 70s and 80s, we could do it again now. So we need a vision that allows us to bring the resources into the communities in need. We spent the last several years fighting over those exam schools that screen kids out. Meanwhile, you have hundreds of schools across New York City that need help. And we've been focusing on this handful of schools. So we need a bigger vision that's targeted in the communities of need.
Yep, you're speaking my language there, Dr. Noguera, and it's something that we are, fortunately, I have a fantastic team that many of the folks on this call know really well, who are working on developing out the programs that we've already built. You heard Jennifer talk about our NEST program. We're building out more inclusive schools. And what's happened is we have only a handful of those great schools and those great programs in each of the boroughs that people know about. And so how do we get the word out about these? How do we scale those up and out? And that's, I think, where, again, to your point, Farah, who are the partners that can help us do that? If we need resources, if we need people to help do the work itself, right? Clinton can become a powerhouse again, but it will need folks in Clinton helping the teachers, helping the leaders, helping the parents to develop both the resources and the practices in them. So absolutely want to build all of these opportunities in New York City, in the local communities, so that folks don't have to get bused far away, and so they don't have to leave the city and can get what each child needs, which is not different, which is not the same at every school, and it is not the same within a school, so that the children are getting what they need and meeting their needs so that they can be successful.
Yeah, we just had a very interesting conversation about that earlier tonight, about why can't schools serve the needs of all children as opposed to having to be bused across the city to go get them. And that's a community school aspect that we'd like to talk about. I think you've addressed in talking about DeWitt is how do we get the principals and the teachers to address the needs of poor BIPOC students in an intrinsic way, that the school is operating this way. It's not necessarily, I have to figure this out myself. This is part of what the DOE is helping me to do. So unless we have anything more to comment on that we've already discussed, Farah, I think, would you like to add, or would you like to go on to the next slide?
We can go to the next slide if that's what you want. I'm listening because the purpose of this is to take notes. So so that we can really see what's best for our students. So, and any of our panelists, Rima, Musa, if you disagree, please challenge the Deputy Chancellor and the doctor. If not, we can move on to the next segment. Okay, Amy?
Good evening. My name is Amy Sai. I am here as a special education District 75 policy. I am a mom of 5. All of my 5 kids are in the public school system, and they're all in the Bronx. I have 3 of my 5 children with disabilities. I have one particular that has multiple disabilities and attends a District 75 program, and is probably you're aware, a District 75 program that's robust in serving students with IEPs in their multiple needs. So I'm a native of Queens, but I raised my kids in the Bronx and experienced a lot of the, great parts of education, but as well as the challenges. So we truly really want to praise that when we are talking about families and communities and the needs of our students, how do we want to create and center the supports around our students individually, especially when you had touched on, our Black and Brown students, our Latinx, our underserved communities, under-resourced communities, the ones that are, really need the services through the community. And secondly, when we talk about the African proverb of it takes a village to raise a child. How do we really create this village to support a child in its educational needs as well as its development? Where we really want to we really want to support a child's safety and health environment in the needs and as well as their education. So, chime in, Dr. Pedro Noguera. I apologize if I said your name wrong, but love to hear your thoughts on that. And Deputy Quintana and the Chancellor Banks.
So, special education has been a challenge, throughout the country. And there's a reason why it's located within the Civil Rights Department of the U.S. Department of Education. And that's because historically, those children were denied the basic right to an education, right? But what we should also know is that special education is an underfunded mandate. So what does that mean? It means that the federal government requires districts to serve children with special needs, but does not provide the funding. That means the funding has to come locally, right? Now, I know that you're in the middle of a little controversy because, and many districts are in this controversy. People who know how to advocate for their children figure out how to get their kids out of the public schools and into private schools where often they get better services. That creates a bigger problem because some kids are getting well served at a very high cost, but many others are not. So I understand why the chancellor is trying to bring greater equity. However, the challenge here is to make sure that the public schools can serve those kids well. Parents should not have to put up with teachers who are not trained, because with children with special needs, they all have an IEP, an individualized educational plan. And what that means is if the plan is credible, if it should be based on an accurate diagnosis of what each student needs. The next step is to make sure that the school operates with fidelity in responding to those needs. That is, that it has a well-trained teacher and the child gets the support they need. If those supports are in place, then what we should see is over time, those kids make progress. And in fact, some of those kids should be able to exit out of special ed altogether because they've begun to catch up with their peers. Not always, because you can't generalize about the nature of the disabilities, but many of the kids who we call special education just need more support, more attention from a well-trained professional. So the challenge here is to make sure that New York City is providing the resources to the schools that serve significant numbers of children with special needs and ensuring that the quality of the services they receive is high quality. It's all about the quality. If we don't get quality right, then all we're doing is throwing money away and we're not getting the results we should be looking for.
Deputy Quintana or the Chancellor would like to chime in as well.
Yeah, I really wish that Dr. Noguera was still in New York. This would be just such a great partnership. I can't really add anything to that. He's absolutely right? And that's why our number one goal in New York City under teaching and learning right now is improving core instruction, and the mandate for the ask for our superintendents and our schools is high quality tier 1. And that is on the responsibility of the adults, but it's on the responsibility of central office, of superintendents, to make sure that the principals and the teachers are well trained. And that's both a capacity and a mindset piece, right? It's like having all the resources in front of them, that they feel confident, right, in both their competency and their just ability to be flexible in what they're doing, but that they know the right practices to meet the needs of every child. Absolutely. And so a big investment for us this year is exactly that, right? It's on training folks, on making sure, so you know that we've asked folks to choose from vetted and approved curricula for grades K-2, because those are those instrumental years in terms of phonics instruction and other pieces that we need to make sure are there for foundational literacy. We have a math plan with a math pilot going so that we're really thinking about math in a very different way and about STEM in general. Just what does it mean to belong in STEM in addition to what are the pedagogical practices. We're looking to build up an inquiry-based approach to teaching and learning because we want to really build across the city, right? When we talk about this is a very large system and we're never going to look exactly the same at every school, and we shouldn't, because we have diverse populations, diverse needs, like diversity is part of what's made New York City so beautiful, but we should have consistency in terms of practices that we know are how students learn best, in terms of the curricula that we know are going to meet the needs of our kids. And so that's part of what we need to do there and making sure that we're establishing that. And Dr. Noguera is absolutely right. It's not funded. Meeting the needs of our English language learners and our students with disabilities in both cases haven't been funded well. And so if that's not going to change, and if we're not going to be able to really just get access to more funding, which, hopefully there are ways to make that happen through policy. But if not, then what are the ways that we can turn the system on its head and really build the structures that are going to support the adults who are working with the children so the children get exactly what they need. And again, in their communities, when we're busing kids 2 hours to get to a program, that's a problem for both it's a cost in terms of busing, but that's a child that's on a bus for 2 hours every morning to get to what they need. And they should have that in their local community. And then when we do that, then we can build up more of what I heard, I think it was Jennifer who had mentioned or you did actually, Amy, the community schools and those wraparound services, right? They should have access to that. They should be able to go to school with their neighbors. They should feel comfortable walking in the building with everybody else. And that means that we need to make sure folks know the right practices, they know the right strategies, they have exactly what they need so they feel good about what they're doing in the best interest of kids. And that's our responsibility right now. That's what my team is responsible for doing, is making sure we have that in there.
Thank you so much for that, Deputy Chancellor Quintana. So Dr. Noguera, somebody who's watching us online just said to me that Clinton is no longer like that. I don't know what they mean by that, and that somehow Clinton it's not working the way, and the person said, it's a staff member, that the principal works very hard, but Clinton no longer does what it used to do. So I guess the question around that would be, number one, how do you make sure that principals and teachers are accountable? And then when they do the right thing, how do you sustain that so that we don't get a comment like this?
Yeah, I mean, these are the tough issues, and the deputy chancellor and the chancellor are grappling with all the time, because it's not just about the resources, because if you just put money into a school that is dysfunctional, you get more dysfunction. You don't get a better school. You need a staff that is committed, dedicated to those students. So, let's not pretend this is easy. Turning around a school like Clinton or a school like Boys and Girls High. I watched that for a long time. I don't know how it's doing now, but for a long time, they were struggling with that school right there, Boys and Girls. So, but we have enough examples in New York of schools that have been turned around, that schools that have become something that we could all be proud of. And we've also seen the opposite happen. Schools that were once good that kind of went by the wayside. So the work of the DOE is to maintain a high standard and then support the staff in delivering high quality education to all students. It's going to look different in different communities, right? And that's okay. But we should be clear on what's our standard and what's our expectations, regardless of the community. And that, I think, is the work that the Department of Education's got to be committed to. And it's ongoing work. You can never just rest and say, okay, we got it fixed, and now we're going to kick back. That's not the nature of this job.
But do you have a prescription for that? Because I can tell you that in my experience, what I see is, I won't mention the name of the person, but let's just put it this way, a lot of principals and superintendents hide behind protocol. So for example, if the CEC or the PA is demanding a different way of communicating, then you get things like, well, I'm just following protocol. They tell me I can only speak to the president and not to the entire PA or the entire CEC. Or they tell me I'm not supposed to do this or supposed to do that. So when do you advise a teacher or a principal or any other staff member to say to, DOE at the central level, at the upper levels, well, this is not working for my school, and I'm working with a parent body here that feels like I need to sit with them as a body and not as individuals, or I need to be doing X, Y, and Z, and therefore I'm going to free myself from these protocols so that I can do what's right and respond to the needs of that community or those parents or those students.
So, a lot of this comes down to leadership. And I'll give you an example. You had a principal in Brooklyn, a woman named Nairi Dixon, who I believe is now a superintendent, but I could be wrong. I know she left the school, but Nairi is an example of a person who turned the school around. When she was brought, and she was only like in her early 30s, she was a relatively young woman, she a young educator. And, she worked with parents in that school to turn that school around. And a lot of her work focused on the culture of the school, creating a culture that brought joy to learning, a culture of collaboration where teachers work together. She was very tough about holding people accountable for what they do. And you need leaders who can do that. But it's not just about scrutiny. It's about support. It's about setting an example, and it's about leadership that builds capacity in others. And so you have leaders like that. The real question is, how are they deployed? And can they work with the principals to bring about the kind of changes that are needed? But I've seen it happen in many parts of New York before, but I've also seen schools that for too long foundered and were not making progress. So, the challenge again for the DOE is to figure out how do we create systems to support schools that are effective, that really do result in change over time.
I'm hopeful that some of the new structures will help with that, right? In that there is a new structure for how superintendents are being supported. They have now teams of their own, and so they can support schools more directly. And I've charged our teaching and learning team to work very closely with leaders to make sure that the leaders are clear on what needs to happen in terms of teaching and learning, and that way we can support the teachers and develop the schools in that way. But to your point, Farah, I would not wait if you have a concern that is affecting students. Those are the kinds of things where you need to reach out, right? And your first point of contact is the principal. And that principal, if they need support, should be reaching out to the superintendent's office, and then they should be reaching out to the central office just to make sure that we are addressing things in the moment and not waiting for the next big meeting to happen, but instead that it's something that we can step in and take care of. If it's a larger issue, then again, there are means through which to connect with each of the different deputy chancellors. And those are things we want to take care of. This is a chancellor who is incredibly responsive to the community, who wants to make sure that the community is part of these pieces. And the other piece that he always talks about, besides making sure that we're listening to parents and the community as a whole, is that we are being really thoughtful about what's in place that is working, so that we can build off of those structures, those practices, those people, those schools. And so celebrating those successes so that we can scale that. And I think that's another one of his pillars, very intentionally, so that where you see those things that are working, to say that too, so that we can use that as a model. If there's a district where that communication with the principal works really well, can we highlight that and say, this is how this principal built community and has gotten all stakeholders engaged. This is what they do. Instead of maybe pointing out like the one who didn't respond, to be able to say, look at the ones that really get everybody involved. Here's what they're doing. And so change the narrative that way too, or change the behaviors that way too. And so I think that there's an opportunity in that as well. happy to be a partner in those conversations. And I'm sure that there are other folks who would be too. Because in the end, what we want to do is make this a better school system. We need to keep our kids here. We need to bring folks back. And we want to make sure that every child who is here is getting we can't continue to have the same data. We can't continue to have the same outcomes. Every child should have access to a great, great school. And so help us build that.
I just want to add to that. I think that one thing that is very important in this is stronger families equals stronger schools. We have to make sure that parents are engaged and empowered with the knowledge so that they can be able to support their students properly. For example, in the situation with IEPs, we need to have more education so that they understand what are the services that they're supposed to be getting, and making sure that language barriers don't keep them from getting that information. So I think that that's something that we need to work on. I mean, just kind of bring the whole conversation together. I think that from our beginning of our conversation, public-private partnership is important, but bringing in parents is equally as important, because parents have a lot of knowledge that they can bring. And I think that that's going to bring strength for the schools overall. And so I just want to elevate that point, because the more we educate our parents, that's how we're going to be able to move in the right direction. Because if they haven't, for the IEP, if they have an understanding of what services their child is supposed to be getting, then they can advocate when they're not getting those services. And then, we will have stronger schools. And we're not going to pull the rug on those, even though there's parents that know how to advocate. We just talked about that. We have parents that know how to advocate. We have other parents that don't. And we need to make sure that everyone is put on the same playing field for that, so that there's not the haves and have-nots.
I agree totally with you, Angela. Before we move to the next slide, I guess the question for us to answer as a community is, what do you do with a principal, for example, or a superintendent, for example, who doesn't respect parents, right? Who perhaps is working in an underserved community, like I am in the Bronx, for example, where, these parents don't have more than a high school diploma or less than that. They're not college graduated, right? College graduates, although both are correct, it doesn't matter. But anyway, they have not graduated from college. They don't have, big jobs. So I'm above them, they are beneath me, and I don't need to be around them. I don't need to speak to them. I can just pretend I'm working with parents and make it up, so what are the consequences? First of all, I guess, for a situation like that, and then how do you encourage principals and superintendents to actually want to work with parents and actually want to teach parents, or what other agencies can you bring in, or what other community organizations or what have you that you can bring in to actually help in that work? I don't have the answer. I don't know if you guys do.
Well, I'll offer a comment here. I think this is a good place where community-based organizations can play a role in supporting schools, because certain populations of parents, new immigrants who don't speak English, families that are dealing with homelessness, others who have trouble engaging schools, with the support of the nonprofits, can become more involved, and the schools can do a better job at reaching those parents. So sometimes, for a variety of reasons, it's hard for the school by itself to do this work, but with the community's help, it can make those connections.
Thank you for that. We're working on it. Yeah. Hopefully, go ahead, Deputy Chancellor. Did you want to add something?
I wasn't the one who came up here. Yeah,
Sorry,
but I will. Go ahead.
Oh,
okay, go ahead.
To add that, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Dr. Noguera, and I think it was frustrating for me in my son's elementary school. I was on the SLT. I'm a very engaged parent, and I'm not afraid to speak my mind. And several times on SLT, I had recommended that we reach out to community-based organizations and religious leaders of the very fast growing immigrant population of students whose parents did not speak English, and try to figure out ways to engage instead of the constant, the PTA saying, oh, those parents don't like to volunteer, and those parents, well, it's a cultural, you have to meet people where they are. And I would keep saying this to them as someone, I worked at Girl Scouts of the USA for 5 years. I know all about volunteer, trying to get people on board with what you're trying to do. But you have to meet them where they are. And I kept saying this, bring the community-based organizations in that they're already interacting with, and we can at least have that foot in the door. And I can't tell you how many times I've said this over the course of 5 years. And I think if there was a community organizer based in the school whose job it was to make those community connections, it would go, I could have just told that person. I'm sure it would have already occurred to them. I wouldn't even have had to say anything. They would have been doing it. It can't just be the parent coordinator, and it can't just be the principal. It's got to be something that the DOE builds into the system, builds into the structure. And that's what Farah, what we're all saying here, I think needs to be done.
Yes, and we suggested that. But let's move on to the next slide, because we don't have Dr. Noguera for long, and although we want him for as long as he can stay. Go ahead, Jennifer, next slide.
Okay, so the last segment that we have for the topic is how can we effectively advocate for children, right, for students with policies that are going to genuinely respond to the needs of students in underserved communities, while also ensuring that their schools are going to be able to react to the specific needs of the community that they're in. So, not taking a one size fits all, but also building a system that's going to be able to be flexible and scale as needed.
So,
How do we do that?
in a lot of ways, this should be the best of times for New York, right? Because the state's chancellor is Dr. Betty Rosa, who is from New York. She worked in New York for years. She works with Lester Young, right? Who also, he's a New Yorker. He worked in Brooklyn. I know both of them very well. So I think that the challenge here is to get the state and the district working together in alignment to support the schools that have historically been marginalized and not getting the support they need. But you have all the right people in place. And now is the question, are they working together on a strategy that will bring about consistent and continuous improvement? That's what we need. But with people like Betty Rosa and Lester Young at the state level, you've got the people you need who really do know New York better than most people we've ever had.
So Dr. Noguera, if I can ask this question, right? Because it's a question I'm deeply interested in. How do we make, within the system, schools both independent and interdependent, right? So that because I don't see it happening. And in my head, it's possible, right? To have a school that is fully independent, responding to the needs of its constituents, for lack and customers, for lack of better words, and at the same time following the guidelines that are set by the city and the state. How do you develop that? Do you have an answer for that? Because I think most people are more comfortable either following or being totally independent, but they don't know how to do both.
So one of the things New York City has that the previous chancellors under de Blasio didn't appreciate, including Carmen Farina and Richard Carranza, you have these networks like the Internationals Network or the Girls Leadership Network, networks of schools that provide additional support to schools. The Urban Assembly is another one. You need those because what they do is they're an intermediary in between the DOE that can get schools working together and bring in extra resources to help schools. And as I recall, at least when I was there, those networks were doing quite well. You need more of them because when schools, because here's the challenge we have, and it's not just in New York City, it's all over. schools don't learn from each other. Okay, so I can name schools in one neighborhood that are doing well, and right across the street, there's schools that are struggling. The people in the school that are struggling never visit the school that's doing well, never see what's different. Now, the DOE should encourage that kind of observation and learning among schools, but that's also where these networks could play a role in supporting schools so that they're learning together and improving together. It's such a large system. You can't expect every principal on their own to know what to do, but they could learn and be mentored by people who are good at what they do, so they're not working, in the dark trying to figure things out.
Yep, that's absolutely right. And honestly, Dr. Noguera, it's like we were meant to be on a call together. So I used to run the Affinity Network, which is actually the network that had, I'm sorry, not the network, the district that had all those schools as part of it. And one of the things that was really beautiful is that they not only learned from the school, so urban assembly from urban assembly, but urban assembly from the internationals, or the international from the consortium, right? And so if there was this opportunity to have that kind of sharing across, and to also have the other piece that's really great about organizations like that is that they come with coaching. And we know that job embedded support really helps leaders and get better at what they do, right? So there was that piece as well. One of the things that Carmen Farina had started a while back was Learning Partners, which was an opportunity for schools to learn from one another and showcase schools for schools to show off something that they did really well. And so that's something that we're actually, something like that we're bringing back. So we're starting actually Lighthouse program. We just sent out, or we will be rather sending out the notices to schools to apply for the first round. And we're also making sure that this time we're including school systems, or rather school programs like T75. We're including those schools that are trying things that are not quite prevalent in our system yet. So the school-wide enrichment model, we're looking at schools that are doing fantastic things in their schools so that we can share in those ways. But the important part for us is for them to share about their process. How did they get to where they are? Because it's really important that we're not just looking at the bright, shiny objects, right? That they're now great and that's wonderful, but rather that we could really think about what's the process that you took to get there, and that'll happen in different ways. So there will be schools that share, the sort of the one day come and see it, and then you can call me and we can keep working in that way. And then there will be the schools that are part of the partnership as well. And so we're really excited about that, and we continue to work really well with the organizations that you mentioned, and continue to ensure that we're all aligned in terms of where we want to take the city. But again, it will take time. And I love that you keep saying, this is a huge system. Can we do it alone? We just need to make sure that we're very clear on the vision, we're very clear on the purpose, and that we work together to get us there.
Thank you, Chancellor, Deputy Chancellor Quintana. But I love what you just said. So I'm wondering also, can we have districts partner with other districts, like have other superintendents work with each other and learn from each other as well? Because I think that's also important.
We're doing that right now. Yeah, oh, so that's great.
Yes, thank you. So we are now literally a few minutes behind. So thank you so much. It's a big topic. We're not going to get through it in one day, but I love the beginning of this discussion. So Dr. Noguera will give you a few minutes to say some parting words, and hopefully we can do this again, and maybe in person next time, as you suggested, because I'm going to hold you to it.
So again, I think this is, I thank you for inviting me, and I think this is a healthy way for the parents and for community to be engaged. The key is to stay engaged, right? Don't treat these kinds of activities as kind of one thing, we did it and now we're moving on. No, this is ongoing work. New York is better positioned than most cities because you have more resources than most cities, right? The question is, how do we get the resources to the schools and communities that need them? That's what we should be focused on, because you have wealthy foundations that are there. You've got nonprofits. You've got engaged parents. You've got the ingredients to create a great school system. You've got the leadership in New York City. Now you got to bring it all together, and keeping parents involved and engaged is a critical part of that. So I want to applaud you for your involvement. My encouragement is stay involved and to work together to solve the problems facing our schools and facing our children.
Thank you so much. And I will stay involved. And I want you to know you actually did personally inspire me. And because, you know, it's unknown teacher with a big dream, and you actually were generous enough to come to my school. I will never forget that, because it is because of you that I'm still involved in this work, because you believed and you came and you gave up your time. And I'm glad you did it again tonight. And I will continue to call on you, because now you can call us twins, you know, brother and sister, because I'm going to continue to do the work and I'm going to continue to rely on you. And Deputy Chancellor Quintana, thank you so much for responding and for being here tonight and for being so open to having such a conversation with us. And you know us at New York City CEFT, we want to be your partners because we believe that the solution is all of us together, and it's okay to disagree. And I have a friend who says, you know, let's disagree to agree, because the only way you find a common ground is if we are disagreeing, as long as we're respectful and doing the right thing and with a good intention of arriving at real solutions. So with that, I want to say thank you to everyone that joined us. And Carla, if you could put up the slides for us for next event, and you're all invited, because, you know, at New York City CEFT, we insist on doing the work. So the next event that we have is November 4th. Carla, please help me with the slide. It's a talk on school safety and community safety, and that will be with Cindy Hook Promise and with Edna, help me out here, with Peace December. That's not the right slide, Carla, but the next one in December. Okay, so this is the one, school community safety, November 4th. And then the next slide, which will be Push Out. It's a screening of the movie, and we're gonna have a book talk around it, because one of the things that we are trying to do at New York City CEFT is have a young people's book club where we read together, and an adult book club, because we believe in educating the village and educating families together. So we're gonna see the movie, and this is in collaboration with DreamYard in person. This event will be in person. And then we're going to have the book talk around it for a few series in November and December. So please join us. Look out for those events. Join us in person and online, because they will be hybrid. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening. Dr.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Quintana, Deputy Chancellor Quintana. I don't know.
No problem. Thank you. Not a problem. Thanks so much.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it too. Did you?
I did. Yeah, I appreciate